Okay. Sorry, I don't know. Yeah, my pay grade. All right, welcome back, everybody. Okay, so do you all get my email? I'm sorry, I've done this in many years. So again, this is the first time using this book, and I was actually really excited to teach this case because I actually read it a few years ago, and it turned out it sucked. So how many of you actually read the Burns case? I could summarize holding in 1 minute. You couldn't see it, so there's no First Amendment issue, right? That's it. There was no First Amendment law at all. The dissent, which the book didn't even include, was actually fascinating. I actually liked the dissent. So I'll talk about Burns, but I also sent you two cases that were in the book in the prior edition. Read those at some point because they're actually much better. You'll need to know this topic eventually, so just read those cases, even over break. I don't care when. I'll go over them today. Okay?
Will you let us know when they reply to your email?
Oh, you already did.
Oh, he did?
Oh, he replies, right? He said, I'll give it serious consideration. No, I sent a very negative email saying, you got to remove this case. It's bad. Bring back the old ones. And he said, I'll give it serious consideration. And then I said, do you mind if I share the case with addition with my students? So you notice the PDF says, prosecutors we violated. Violence we prosecute. Notice that? Yeah, I got permission. I'm good. They're gonna charge me with a crime for sharing old property cases. Yeah, that's it. That's exactly what's gonna happen. So dramatic. Anyway, they agreed. I mean, it's a challenge, right? Because you don't know how good a case can be until you actually prep it for class, right? You might read it. It seems like a really good case. It's like, wait a minute, I can teach this case in 5 minutes. And the reason why the case is so not good for teaching is because it's decided on the basis of Rule 56, summary judgment. It's a very narrow issue about what's in the record, which is of interest to none of you. Anyway, so we'll talk about that a bit. But I want to also mention two cases from last year. So first off, let's do a little bit of review. A number of you had questions in the exit polling about the difference between a variance and a hardship. I want to go over that for a few moments if I can. Okay, so again, to repeat, when you have a zoning code, you're trying to anticipate lots of things, right? You're trying to anticipate how things should look, how big things should be, what colors they should be, and so on. But no matter how good you are at planning, things will arise that were unexpected, right? The variance was designed to deal with unexpected situations. Specifically, the variance is designed to deal with hardships. That is, if someone can demonstrate to the zoning board some substantial hardship that isn't really addressed by the zoning code, then an exception can be made, a variance can be granted, and the person can build what they need or keep what they need, whatever it happens to be. Again, so variances are based on hardships that were not expected. But still, just because you have a hardship doesn't mean you get your variance automatically. The courts are also asked to consider how will this decision affect the public interest, right? Which is sort of this very vague and nebulous concept. So generally, these zoning boards have a lot of discretion. The courts will defer what the zoning board decides. In fact, the case we had last week from New Jersey, of course, it's from New Jersey, is something of an outlier. Okay. Everyone get the concept of the variance. The variance. All right, now the other one. The other one's called the special exception You also see it called a conditional use permit, a CUP. Conditional use permit or special exception. I usually call it special exception because it's shorter. Also, I always chuckle when I say CUP, right? Okay, I got a bunch of 5-year-olds in the room. Good. ICUP, right? Oh, it's okay. A special exception is different, right? A special exception is where the legislature anticipates that some situation will arise, and they'll say, okay, if you can meet certain factors, check X, Y, and Z on a checkbox, you will get a special exception you can build. So imagine they say, generally you can't have, I don't know, a 2-family house here, but let's say if it's a certain width and a certain size, a certain number of bedrooms, you get your 2-family house here. Okay. The legislature spells out specific exceptions, special exceptions where you can deviate from the zoning code. But the very nature of the special exception is it's not discretionary. It's automatic. If you can check the boxes, this number of square feet, this number of bedrooms, this number of parking spots, whatever it happens to be, you will get your special exception and you can build. Okay. Now, if the legislature tries to give the zoning board discretion to consider the public welfare or the public interest, the statute is problematic. It's a violation of what you might call the non-delegation doctrine, that the legislature is delegating legislative power to local governments, and they cannot do that. The legislature of the state has to keep its own legislative power. So the case we had last week was a factors 2 and factor 4 concern things like, is it in the public interest, is it in the public welfare? That goes too far. You cannot give the local zoning board that much discretion. All right, everyone with me? Okay. And the other thing we covered last class was the topic of grandfathering. Grandfathering. Okay. If you have a use that is some construction that was in effect before the zoning code was implemented, you're grandfathered. You have what's called a prior non-conforming use. And generally, you can keep that prior non-conforming use. Generally. The exception is what's called amortization, right? Amortization. Amortization is a process by which a non-conforming use can be sort of wound down, right? Can be eliminated. If you eliminate it right away, it's probably a taking. It's confiscatory. In most jurisdictions, if you give sufficient time, maybe several years, it's okay because we expect neighborhoods to not be frozen in time forever. But the Pennsylvania case was somewhat unique in that they gave only 3 months, and it was pretty obvious they were going after this one adult bookstore, so that was not permissible. Okay. All right. Everyone okay with the last class? Any questions on that? No? Okay. All right, we can move on then. So the subject of this class, and I think, oh, I want to make sure I mention this. So okay, so we have spring break next week, right? You will not be here. Okay. I will not be here March 21st. No class. It's on the syllabus. Been the syllabus for now 3 months. To be somewhere else today. I'm sorry, I don't like canceling class, but I will be somewhere else. Everything will line up. We don't have any problems. We'll be back here March 23rd. So after they won't see me for a while. Okay. But this class and the class on March 23rd asks how are zoning laws limited by the federal constitution, right? Not just the takings clause, but also the First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, we might call freedom of association, and other protections of religion. You're taking common law now, right? Memory serves. You've not taken First Amendment yet. Is that right? And you haven't done First Amendment yet, right? So some people have. Who's actually taken First Amendment so far? Do you take it concurrently with con law?
I did.
I don't know why people do that. Did you like that?
It was horrible.
I'm not asking. I'm talking to her. Please raise your hand. Yeah. Yeah. Really? Duke? Same?
Yes, well, we had two different,
That must be confusing.
that helps. There was two different perspectives.
Yeah, I voted against allowing concurrent taking, but what do I know? I think it's a mistake, but what do I know? Okay. Anyway, so unfortunately now, for those who haven't taken First Amendment, you get a crash course today, which I don't think is excellent, but we'll do the best we can. The First Amendment's got a lot of stuff in there, right? 5 freedoms: the so-called Establishment Clause, the Free Exercise Clause, freedom of speech and of the press, the right to assemble, and the right to petition the government for redress of grievances. Again, you will take an entire semester on these 5 lines. It's true. And think about it. The entire semester is this, basically, right? A 2-hour class. For your purpose, we'll keep it, I think, as simple as possible. The Constitution speaks of the freedom of speech. And when I say speech, I think of words, either spoken or written. But the court, right or wrong, although the Supreme Court can be wrong as well, it's wrong often, but the Supreme Court has never limited the First Amendment to actual speech, right? Words, whether they're printed or spoken. It's extended the First Amendment to art, paintings, song, adult dancing, pornography, right? A wide range of forms of expression. And really, if you think of the First Amendment's free speech clause, it's more about the freedom of expression than the freedom of speech. It's probably a more safer language. But what about conduct, right? When is conduct speech? And so there are 3 cases the Supreme Court decided in the span of about 30 years that are relevant. And if you took First Amendment, you probably studied these 3 cases. First is called United States versus O'Brien. Sound familiar? Okay. From 1968. The second one's called Texas versus Johnson from 1989, from right here in Texas. The third one's called RAV versus St. Paul, 1992. By the way, whenever you see a case with initials, it's probably a minor. And if you, indeed, that was a minor. So whenever you see initials in a case, it's a minor because they don't put the person's name in the caption. Right? All 3 of these cases involved a similar question. When is setting something on fire speech? Huh? How is burning something protected speech? Well, fire is a very symbolic act, right? When you light something on fire, maybe you're just trying to keep warm or make some s'mores, whatever else you're trying to do. But very often, burning something is meant to convey a signal, right? So, for example, during the Vietnam War, people had what were called draft cards. I'm sure a lot of you probably registered for the Selective Service when you turned 18. It's all digital now. But back in the day, it was on paper. And the government would give you this little piece of card, that's a wallet-sized card, that included your information and said what was your draft status. And in theory, at least, the government could then use that card to call you up to serve in the military, unless you had an exemption or something to that effect. All right. So in 1966, O'Brien and a few of his comrades burned their draft cards in the steps of a courthouse. This was not done, privately. It wasn't done in their backyard. It was done in a very public place. And they did it deliberately to try and get the attention of everyone else, right? And they wanted to send a signal that they were opposing the draft and they were opposing the Vietnam War. There was a federal statute that barred the destruction of a draft card. And this law was probably enacted for a few reasons, right? One of the reasons was, well, there were no computers back then. The best evidence of your record is the actual card. That if someone stopped you on the street, they could say, "Are you a draft dodger?" Okay, show me a draft card, right? It served an actual utilitarian purpose to verify what your draft status was. But there's another purpose, right? Congress didn't want to let these hippies burn their draft cards. I'm being slightly facetious. That was it, right? This law is designed to prevent people from burning draft cards considered disrespectful to the draft. Duke, you're shaking your head. Am I fair on that one? Yes, sir. Okay, I speak out of turn. Perhaps. So then this case goes to Supreme Court and presents a question, right? What happens when you have conduct, right? They weren't prosecuted for saying, "End the draft. I hate the war." They were prosecuted for lighting the draft card on fire, right? How do you handle mixed messages, right? Where part of the conduct is speech, they're saying, "I want to stop the war," and part of it is striking a match and holding up to a piece of paper. And so the court put together this four-pronged test. No one asked the factors; they don't really matter, right? Four-factor tests don't matter at the Supreme Court. Only one of them actually matters, so I'll skip it, right? But what the court said is this law was okay because there was a purpose there that was unrelated to suppression of free speech, right? What was the purpose? Keeping records accurate, right? So separate and apart from shutting down the hippies, it was designed to protect government records, protect government property, and so they allowed the prosecution of O'Brien to go forward. There was dissent saying this is hysteria. You're trying to punish people for engaging in protected speech, but it was 8-1 vote. Okay. This gave us the so-called O'Brien test. You don't need to know it for this class. You'll learn it later. And preview doesn't really matter because the court doesn't follow it anyway, right? But that was the O'Brien test. All right, now we go to 1989. We come down to Dallas. That year, Texas was hosting the Republican National Convention. And there was a massive protest in Dallas outside of the site of the convention. The convention was in 84. The Supreme Court case was 89, sorry. So this was the 84 convention where Reagan was nominated for re-election. You have a guy named Gregory Lee Johnson who did what everyone does with the American flag. He doused it in kerosene, lit it on fire, right? What else would you do with the flag, right? And he was very clear. He was an anarchist. He opposed the government. He did this to oppose the various policies of the government and so on. And at the time, Texas had a law that banned the destruction of the American flag. Now, you may not know this, but what's the correct way of actually disposing of an American flag? Anyone know this? You cremate it, yeah, Julianne? Good. Oh, good. Perfect. I was hoping we were scout. Perfect. Yeah. Into pieces, right? And they bury the ashes, or you scatter the ashes.
Thank you.
I think you bury the ashes. If anyone checked me on that one.
Hold it a specific way before you hang it. Before you actually.
Were you a scout also?
Yeah, and then I had to do the flag for school. So you have to unfold it one way, fold it in a special way when you take it off the actual flagpole.
Good. Yeah. So I mean, it's sort of strange that the very act of burning the flag is at the same time an act of respect and an act of disrespect, right? It's at the exact same way, but it goes to what sort of the intent is behind the burn. Now, whether you douse it in kerosene and throw it on the floor and say "Death to America," right? That's a different symbol. That's what the Iranians did, right? That's a different symbol than what perhaps the Girl Scouts do with their badge. You know what's about these new cookies that are in short supply? The raspberry cookies. You following this? Like, there's a new cookie, and people selling them on eBay for like markups. And the girls are like, don't mark it up because it's just taking money from the Girl Scouts. Oh God, I get hit up because they just knock my door. I'm like, yes, money, go. Give me the boxes. I have way too many of those boxes till last month.
I'll take some.
I didn't offer any, but thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. But the $5 are good. Anyway, let's go on. But thank you, Julianne and Fernando. That's exactly right. So this case goes to Supreme Court, and the question again is, does Texas have an interest in banning this expression other than suppressing protest, right? And the answer the court comes up with is basically not, right? If they're trying to if they want to punish creating a disturbance, they can do that. But the burning the flag is very targeted to speech, right? The state said that it's a symbol of unity, and that reflects what's called viewpoint discrimination. You can't target particular acts. And actually, Texas versus Johnson was a 5-4 case, and who cast fifth? It was Justice Scalia, who was generally not thought of as a squish. Scalia would often hold this case up, perhaps rightly or wrongly, as a case where he voted the opposite of what he actually thought. He gives us this one speech sometime where he said, if I was the king, if I was the king, uh, where is it? I'll get the quote right. Here's it. That if I were the king, I would not let people burn the American flag, right? But we have a First Amendment, and we have to follow it. Right? He was very clear this is a case where his personal leanings went the opposite. There's this great story where Scalia's wife she's still alive, is very conservative. And the day after this case comes out, they're sitting around the breakfast table, and she's reading the Washington Post where they talk about this case, and she starts like singing the national anthem in front of him just to taunt him. And it's Maureen. All right. All right. So that is Texas versus Johnson, 1989. The third case in this trilogy was in 1992, RAV versus City of St. Paul, Minnesota. Now, who's RAV? He was a juvenile, and he did something very stupid. He took broken chair legs, taped them together, made a cross, and then he burned them in front of the house of an African American family, right, in the yard. Why? What else would you do with a broken chair, right? So again, he burned this cross in a family's yard, in a black family's yard. Okay. St. Paul charged him with what's called a bias motivated crime, right? So it wasn't just he committed a trespass, which he did. It wasn't just that he lit a fire in a backyard, which you can't do. It's he did it with the improper intent. And long story short, the statute concerned crime based on bias and hatred. Okay. Now the court said that you could punish these sorts of acts, but the statute here was a form of viewpoint discrimination. Indeed, hateful speech is protected by the Constitution. There are later cases involving cross burning that said you can't do it when it's a terrorist threat. So if you actually burn a cross to terrorize people, that statute's okay. But this statute was written in such a way that only the viewpoint was considered. So the court 9-0 ruled in favor of RAV, but they held you can't have viewpoint discrimination, right? Okay. Now, why do I give these three cases? These three cases share something in common. No, not just something that's being burned, but something that's being burned in public, right? One of the basic tenets of free speech law is that when you're conveying information to people, it's protected. Now, the Burns case is different, right? The Burns case is a little different. Now, who actually read it? I don't want to cold call. Kelsey, want to just tell us the facts, please? It's a bit of a long case, but just sort of summarize it for us if we can.
Yeah, so in 2013, the millionaire burned.
What did you say?
2013, Mega Millions.
Is that in the case? He's a Mega Millionaire?
Well, based on the house.
No, you're right. It's actually not in the case. I just wanted to play. So this dude's wealthy, right? Palm Beach is one of the most wealthiest towns in the entire United States, and to have a beachfront property, what is it, 10,000 square feet?
Yeah, 10,000.
I mean, just so this is like a palace by the beach. So this dude's wealthy. Maybe even more than millions. I don't know, but go on, Kelsey. I just want to just clarify that point was not in the case, but we're drawing an inference from the facts.
And he decided that he wanted to build another house that was going to be about 25,000 square feet, and it would be a philosophy of simplicity. Style,
yeah.
And living with an emphasis on fewer possessions. So then he had to get permission from the Architectural Review Commission, which reviewed this.
ARCOM. It's Orwellian.
And they were tasked essentially with making sure that any structures were in harmony with proposed land development, not acceptably dissimilar to existing structures within 200 feet. So they considered architectural compatibility, arrangement of the components of the structure, appearance of mass from the street, and diversity of design that's complementary with the size and massing of adjacent properties.
Good.
He went through a process of meeting with the commission multiple times. Neighbors brought up complaints about the property, And his solution was essentially to engage in such extensive like landscaping
Right.
that the house really wouldn't be seen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when they finally, they ended up approving the demolition of his current property, but they wouldn't give him approval for the new house. So he filed a Section 1983 claim and said that they were infringing on both his First Amendment free speech rights and his 14th Amendment equal protection and due process rights.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kelsey. All right. So this is a case involving really wealthy people fighting over things that none of us actually care about, right? No, it's true. I mean, I cannot relate to this case for the life of me, right? Just I can't actually get what's in the minds of these people that you fight so much over architectural style. Right, but let's take a step back. Palm Beach had a zoning board. The zoning board gave approval for this construction, right? It satisfied all the space requirements, all the size requirements, it met all the zoning requirements. But in Palm Beach County, you have to do something else. You have to appeal to the ARCOM, this Architectural Review Commission, which has basically the superpower to decide if your property is harmonious or cohesive or consistent with neighboring properties. The idea is you have to sort of look like what everyone looks like. So whatever your neighbors have, that's what you have to have. And if what you have is too much of a departure from what your neighbors have, you can't do it. I'm not exaggerating. This is basically what the statute says. They went through many rounds of revisions, and by the way, these revisions are not cheap, right? Every time you're revision, you have to have an architect make these cute little 3D models, all this other stuff, right? This stuff takes a lot of time and effort. Then Kelsey raised, I think, what's an important point. Eventually, it seems he made a choice. In order to get the neighbors off his back, he basically shrouded the place in fences, in walls, with hedges, palm trees, coconut trees, right? He basically made the entire property covered, right? Covered by, let me see the picture in a moment. Covered by different forms of protection, such that, that was the old house, right? Such that you couldn't even see anything. Now, this case went through litigation, and there was a summary judgment motion. And on summary judgment, the trial court said that the design of a house is not protected speech. This is a very difficult question, right? Is the mere design of a house conveying a message, or is it just a house, right? The court has held that if you put a sign in your window, that's speech. If you want to put art on your lawn, that's speech. But is the design of the house itself speech? And that's something of an open question. The courts have sort of different approaches to it. Now, why do I hate this case for teaching? Because the majority opinion did not even touch that question. The court simply assumed that's protected speech, but they decide on very narrow grounds, right? What were the grounds which was decided? In order to have expressive speech, people have to see it. And because of all the stupid trees and walls and hedges he built to pass the ARCOM, no one can see his house. Therefore, there's no protected speech. Judgment affirmed. That's it. That's the entire case. I described in one sentence. There's nothing more to that. In fact, I was emailing with the editors, like, remove this case from the book. It's not worth it. And I regret assigning it because I didn't realize until I actually had to prep for class. I don't always know how a case is going to shake out until I prepare, and now I know. Right? The dissent, which I also read, was much more useful. Right? The dissent says these arguments are kind of insane. Do you really think you're going to build a multi-million-dollar house that no one will ever see? Will there be guests? There are guest bedrooms. Will anyone from the street see it? Maybe. Right? There's also the issue of whether you can see it from the beach, that is from the other side. And that really wasn't the record. So the majority decided this case on very narrow grounds, and perhaps with good reason, right? In con law, there's a principle called avoidance, right? The courts should avoid a constitutional ruling where they can. So before they strike down an act of government, are there other narrow ways to rule on it? Sure. The evidence in this case suggests that you couldn't see the house in the public. Therefore, there's no First Amendment issue. That's it, folks. That's all I can say about it. right? The dissent, I think, was actually fascinating about different types of architecture and so on. There was some kind of snippy back and forth. You can tell there was a thing. Fun fact, so the author of the opinion, Judge Luck, was joined by Judge Carnes. Judge Luck clerked for Judge Carnes. So basically, his former boss is a judge in the same court. None of you care. It's a cool thing. All right. Yes, Max.
Do you agree with the majority opinion or the dissent more? Because I honestly I feel like you can tell a lot about a person by their house, like just the way it's designed, the way it's decorated, like the way it appears. Because like when you're looking for a house, usually like you look for something that you want, something that you like, something that like actually fits your use and purpose.
But is any of that expressive?
It's expressive to your wants and
But is that
needs.
what message are you expressing?
Your own. It's like the same way as like you dress. It's like what you live in. It's like the most personal expression that you could possibly make.
Maybe. Well, the majority didn't actually address the question. Oh, I don't know what the majority thinks of that question. We have no idea.
But I'm asking you like what you agree with more.
I was actually, I think I'm partial to the dissent on the law, but I think I'm partial to the majority on the posture of the case. Again, I think the majority probably was right that this is a very bad, what we might call a vehicle to rule because this place just wasn't visible. Right? In other words, if this message was so important to him, why did he cover it up? But the answer, of course, is he covered up to pass the ARCOM, to pass the architectural board. So it's not a good case for federal courts.
So
In fact, let me make the point more clearly. The usual path, if the ARCOM denies a permit, you appeal to the state court system, which would have been better. He ran to federal court, which I think was probably not the best strategy. And because he ran to federal court, the record was limited. And you decide summary judgment rule 56 on the basis of the record.
so after you answer that question, like if he were to have not planted those trees and built those hedges and stuff, just based on it being viewed from the street, which view would you agree with more?
Again,
Just for
yeah, no, I'm going to answer your question if I may. What I don't think is a good idea is for people to turn the federal courts into zoning boards of appeals, right? I think it's a bad idea. I am pretty sure when he built this house, he wasn't thinking about conveying a message. I think he made that excuse up after they denied his permit. Right? In other words, anytime you have any sort of construction, you can say, "Oh, well, I want this construction because it's my I'm conveying a message." You can make that 100% of the time, and then you basically have a trump card in any zoning code, right? So maybe all ARCOM is unconstitutional. Maybe we should not have people deciding what things look like. That's just beyond the scope of government power. I think you need to have some clear evidence at the outset that he was actually intending to convey the message, but I don't know. I'm sort of I'm nervous about these claims because again, the proper channel to appeal this would have been through the state court system, not ranked the federal court, the 1983 action. I'm not mad.
And he actually had the gall to petition a writ to the Supreme
Oh, I know that.
Court to hear.
I blogged about it. I wrote about the time. Yeah, no. Well, this was never getting granted. I mean, just actually, I think I had friends who filed an amicus brief on this issue. Well, there's nothing galling about filing a cert petition. It's what wealthy people do, right? If you have lots of money, you hire a lawyer, they'll file a cert petition. Well, but it was too late though. His statute of limitation ran a long time ago. There are other cases we'll have this semester where a zoning board made a decision and the parties didn't like the result and they ran to federal court. And that's generally going to lose because the federal courts are not going to be deciding issues of zoning appeals. It's just not. I don't. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Okay, Max. Last question.
So like in the case of like a historical neighborhood, right? If you're like in your proposition to like paint the color of your house or something, you're like, I'm doing this because this is my First Amendment free speech and I want to express this message, and then you just did it. How would a court likely rule on that?
Well, the architectural districts are a little bit different. In fact, the Heights, if you know where that is by I-10, is considered an architectural zone, historical district altogether. We will do a case about historical changes, and the courts have basically said keeping things the same way they were is really important, and that could actually even trump First Amendment rights.
Wow.
Yeah, we'll do a case involving a train station, Grand Central Station, Manhattan, that was designated a historical zone. Right, just the building, right? Because it's a train station of some historical note. And we'll do that case in a few weeks. We good? All right, good. All right. So any actual questions on the Burns case again? Julianne, please. I mean to cut it short, but like I was like, I don't know what else to take from it. It's a very straightforward case. Was that the Pokemon Go? Yeah.
Oh.
Okay.
Is that relevant for our exam?
I'm so sorry. Here, go on. I'm sorry. I scared. I'm sorry. I don't want you to know any of these things. These are all lower court precedents, right? It was
Right.
the DiMarcianzo case. What was it called? It's a case from New York, right? Yeah, it was a case from New York. This is why are we teaching students circuit precedent on free speech from in property? It's such a bad case to learn. Anyway, so I don't even want to. I forget you read it. I don't even. Don't forget you read it, but just it's just there's very little takeaway. But I do want to do these other cases. Did anyone read at least the summaries I sent? A couple of you. Yeah, all right, fine. I sent it at midnight. This is when I do my work. My kids go to sleep. I do my work. So if you didn't read it, that's fine. I'll sort of summarize it. What was that? Oh, was it one? I stay up late. I don't even know. Good. I'm glad some of you are still awake. I like working late because the time is everything's quiet. No one bothers. No emails. No one's calling me. No one's telling me to do anything. I don't have any like frantic students. I had a student graduated 5 years asked me a question last night. Like just I get emails all the time. People, yeah. No, it never stops. You guys, you can always come back. I don't have an answer for you, but you always come back. Anyways, where am I? All right. So let's talk about the first case, which is State ex rel Stoyanov, Berkeley. Now, this was a good case, and I complained. I told him to put this one back in the book. It was a good case. All right, so how to begin? We have a case in Ladue, Missouri, and this is a very wealthy area. And all the houses had what you might call classic styles. Anyone care about architecture? Know anything about architecture? I don't. This topic I always have difficulty with. Colonial architecture, French, provincial architecture, English Tudor architecture. I have no idea what any of that stuff means. Okay, thank you, sir. So you have a person named Stoyanov, who wants to build a house that looks like this. It's sort of a pyramid shape with a flat top and triangular shaped windows and doors on sort of the edges with a garage or underpass, right? So just even looking at this picture, the houses next door are going to be looking very different than this one. Okay. Can he do this? Right? Can he do this? So there was a statute that prohibited unsightly, grotesque, and unsuitable structures. Now, why did the government ban these sort of ugly structures? And you say, well, Josh, because they're ugly. So I erased the heart. The heart came back. It was actually an experiment. I was just taunting. I'll break Brad's heart. What happens? Right? Who's he?
No, he's also trying to keep the art. From like a art agency, he keeps erasing Brad and something. So now he's adding that as well. So it's an ugly hat.
Oh.
Like,
Just draw another.
I want to do it. Why so serious, right?
yeah, don't smile.
Too soon. All right. So let's go on. Why does the government have an interest in regulating aesthetics, appearance? So the answer is not because it looks ugly, right? That's not a good enough reason. It's actually a related reason. Property values. The reason why government can regulate what things look like, right, is to maintain property values. Perhaps in some level, the people of Palm Beach fear that if we allow this ugly, house in our neighborhood, it'll drop property values down. And you might ask, wait a minute, how can you possibly know that, right? How can anyone predict how a single house on a block will affect property values? And what if they're wrong, right? What if people love this design and want to pay more money for it? So the answer is no one cares, right? There's no guarantee that you have to be right that this will affect property values. You can just make a wild assertion and the courts will defer to that. I mean, that's basically it, right? If some government official says, we need things to look a certain way to keep property values up, that's the end of the conversation. So virtually every case we have at regulating aesthetics is not about designing it for the sake of appearances. It's designed to keep things looking the same, keep property values up. And again, why do you want to keep property values up? Keep the tax base up, money for schools, money for public services, and keeping people who are poor out. It's the same thing every single class. All right. Okay, so Mr. Stoyanov puts forward this design. What do you think happens? The architectural board says no. This was a monstrosity of grotesque design that would impair property values. It would not be in conformity with the neighborhood. It was grotesque, unusual, and they also did the same thing as will affect property values. Again, how do they know? If this is the only house in the block that looks like it, how can they possibly know it will affect property values? I mean, can you imagine you're looking to buy this house? Like, well, you know what? I was going to buy this house, but that house next door is kind of ugly. I don't want to live there. I mean, I guess these people exist. I don't know. And anyone here would do that? Yeah, you wouldn't buy a house next to an ugly house?
No.
No?
Like the gentrified neighborhood.
What is that like? What does that mean? Living like the gentrified neighborhoods? What's that mean?
It's like you're buying like a super nice townhome next to like the third ward. I don't know. It makes sense.
All right,
And
let's okay. Let's move on. I have no idea where you're going with this, but I really have no idea where you're going. Okay, okay. But anyway, the board said here they were afraid. The board said here they were afraid that having this sort of weird modernistic flying saucer house would hurt property values. This one reminds me of, you know, Buffalo Speedway, how about Rice Village, they had like Darth Vader house. It kind of looks like that. Actually, it was recently on the market. Someone Google it. It sold for like millions of dollars. I can't remember. This was the last year or so. Okay. So Stoyanov sued the building commissioner of the town, and they raised a couple arguments, right? The first is, did the zoning board even have the power to impose aesthetic standards? And that's AESTHETIC, aesthetic standards, how it looks. And the answer here is yes. Why? Again, property values is always the answer. The reason why the zoning board can make decisions on what things look like is because perhaps having unusual, unharmonious properties could diminish the value of the property next door. Maybe it is, maybe it doesn't, who knows, right? What do I know? But even the possibility that it could is sufficient. And the court says very clearly, stabilizing property values is a reason to support zoning laws. That is the basis of all the stuff. It's remarkable how that one justification trumps everything. Okay. All right. What about the amount of discretion? Right. We said that the zoning boards can't make decisions about public welfare and the general interest, right? They can't do that. But they are allowed to make decisions based on what things look like. There are architects on the board. They have experience in architecture. By the way, let me take a step back. One of the things about this sort of architectural board is it privileges the views of those on the board, right? Those who are on the board have these sort of traditional understandings of architecture. What if, like, some modern architecture wants to apply for the position on the board? He's not getting elected or appointed, I should say. So it sort of keeps a specific style as the majority, and other people can't go onto that board. But at least in the abstract, this board has the qualifications to make those decisions. Okay. Then we get something called void for vagueness. Void for vagueness. Anyone know what that is? Void for vagueness? Hey, Julianne?
It's whenever in law or statute is so unclear that you can't really apply it, concisely and like consistently,
Mhm.
and then it also ends up.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you so much. So one of the tenets of the due process clause is you have to know what the law is, right? If the law is unclear to such an extent, it cannot be enforced. You maybe remember the Harry Potter movies where they put the laws so high no one could see them. Remember that? It's actually based on a Roman emperor. I always forget, was it Nero or Caligula? I always forget which one. But the emperor would put the laws in these very tall columns so no one could see them. It's like, oh, the law's published, but no one could see it. So they, what are you can do with that? And so Stoyanov argues that these codes, which impose aesthetic guidelines, are so vague that they can't even be enforced. Now, this might sound like a really good argument, but I'll tell you it's very hard to win on. Most laws are not as clear as you might like them to be, but they're still going to pass the void for vagueness standard. And the sorts of words in this statute, right? Is it in general conformity? Is there cohesion, right? These are good enough. So even if they're sort of open-ended, this statute still passed muster. All right. So in the end, the court says, sorry, the reason why this is a drawing, not a photo, it never got built. All right. In the end, that this construction was not permissible and it was never built. Again, this guy spent a lot of time, a lot of money on hiring an architect to make these sort of drawings and schematics and stuff. And in the end, he couldn't build. I don't know if he built something else or whatever he did, but this house never went up. So the reason why I like this case is it sort of jumps over the issue of whether this house is even protected by the First Amendment, and it focuses on the actual procedural mechanism, how you go about challenges the state court. This is how you're supposed to do it, right? When the zoning board denies your building permit, you go through the state court, says you don't rent to federal court. I think Mr. Burns got, no pun intended, burned because he did that. Sorry. Okay. So please read that case later, but I welcome any questions on it now. No? Oh, yes, go ahead, Clayton.
So do we need to know all the big cases or just to
There's not much you know from the Burns case, so yeah, all three. I mean, again, but the holding of the Burns case is so narrow because of the nature of the summary judgment motion. All that's considered is, was this visible to the public? No. Yeah, I'll tell you a story later. Yeah, Randall.
Is this situation in which I guess architectural stuff is like a work of art or like an art expression?
Well, look, this is sort of the issue that the majority opinion Burns skipped over. Because imagine everything in one. The beer can house, right? Know the beer can house in Houston? You ever been there? It's kind of by the Heights. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. The entire house is covered in beer cans, right? Like every square inch of the house is covered in a beer can. They have beer can gazebos and stuff. I'd say that house is a work of art. I don't know if anyone's ever seen it. They agree with me. So there actually might be other houses that designed it. I think what's key is people actually take tours of the beer house. People can see it from the street. It's visible to everyone. I think that'd be a much tougher case. But simply having a house with a minimal architectural style, right? Having few lines and simple colors, that's any house, right? Yeah.
I was just gonna say, like, in my neighborhood in San Antonio, there's like this famous artist, you can go like all these structures, like sculptures in front of like the house, and then like HOA would like kind of bring them, like, you have to bring them down, and then it turns to like a cave or something. But like they're like, no, it's First Amendment because like he's like an artist, and like his art.
Well, there are a lot of case solving signs from a house, right? So there's a case that was referenced in the reading called City of Ladue versus Giglio. Again, the same City of Ladue I just mentioned. This case has a lot of cases from the city, where this was during the Gulf War in the early 90s, and a city basically banned putting signs in the window. And what they were trying to do was ban signs opposing the war, right? That was the purpose of this ordinance. But meanwhile, you could have signs saying for sale or opposing this or that political candidate, right? So different types of signs were allowed. And usually those cases are decided on the ground of viewpoint discrimination, right? That if the government's targeting only one viewpoint, they can't do it. Trickier are signs on the side of the road, right? For example, what if you have a sign saying, church service on Sunday at this location, or you're having a sign advertising a political candidate? Or what about these sort of, these big, electronic billboards that blast, bright colors to sort of distract people on the side of the road? There's a lot of case law about signs. And the case law there is almost incoherent. You'll probably cite them in First Amendment. Did you guys read v. Town of Gilbert in First Amendment? Or City of Austin versus Reagan advertising? Yep. Okay. There are other cases about this. I don't want to do them now. I don't even want to teach this topic here because you haven't. It's almost. Anyway, I'm conflicted. Go ahead. I did it. I don't have to like it, but it's in the book, so I want to try and cover it. Okay. Everyone okay with this case? All right. Let's do the next case, which none of you read, but I'll be happy to summarize. I'm sorry. I was like, oh man, when are you doing class tomorrow? I'll be over in 15 minutes, which it was. I mean, the first case took me 15 minutes to teach. Basically, there's nothing there. Yes, Hillary.
Do ordinary and things like this in the neighborhood are approved by like, or they have their own special sort of?
I think they're called mobile homes. I'm joking. Uh, so usually those mobile homes are located in the U6 type areas where anything goes. And I don't know that there are any architectural review architectural review petitions for trailer parks. Usually you would not have one of those in Palm Beach County. They would be run out of town in 5 seconds. So the places where these RCOMs exist are usually very wealthy and they're going for a specific look. So I think it's a problem. Okay. All right. So the next case is like is a case from hell for the builder. And I'll explain why in a moment. So this case arose in the town of Issaquah, Washington. Anyone ever been there? Okay. Anyway. So this is where it is right now. Issaquah, Washington. I think there's like a hardware store or something in there. Yeah. All right. This is Gilman. All right. So the main drag, the main street in this area is Gilman Boulevard. And Anderson wants to build some sort of commercial development, some sort of store in this area. And again, Issaquah had basically an architectural review board. But it's very specific what they required. That the buildings must have appropriate proportions in relationship to each other. The colors must be harmonious with bright or brilliant colors. And monotony should be avoided. The buildings had to be interesting, whatever that means. All right, so we have a problem, right? You must be harmonious with the surrounding area, but you cannot be monotonous. Again, let's say it again. You must be harmonious, but you can't be monotonous. That's repetitive. The colors must be harmonious with bright or brilliant colors, but you can't stick out too much with bright or brilliant colors. And it's got to be interesting. Okay, this word is my least favorite in English language. It has no meaning. The word interesting has no meaning at all. Think about it. Whenever you say it's like, oh, that's interesting. What have you actually said? You convey no information that's useful. I try not to use it as best as I can. Describe why it's interesting. Oh, usually it's just, oh, whatever, that's interesting. You start blowing a person off. That's usually how it's used. Or like, wow, that's interesting. You're being sarcastic. Anyway, so here we have Anderson, and he wanted to build a structure that had a blue metal roof and a white stucco, kind of this foamy stuff facade. Okay, so there are several meetings, right? First meeting, December of '88. They review his application. They say, well, your facade does not fit with the surrounding area. The color is not compatible with our neighborhood, and they want more depth. Okay, so he goes back, submits the plans again. Okay, different plan. Now there's a metal roof, a brick facade, and gray and blue trim. They're still not happy with it. So the members of the committee, I swear to you, say, drive up and down the road and look at the good and bad examples. Right? This doesn't create the right feeling for us. And by the way, just to look at what's nearby, there's a gas station across the street. There's an auto repair shop, which I think I showed. There's the gas station across the street, Shell, and there's a bank. Okay, so he came back to the next meeting one more time. Now the design had brick, a wood trim, and sort of an overhang, but they still had concerns. And the board says, we want you to drive up and down the boulevard, and look what you see. You get a certain feeling driving around town, and we don't get this feeling from you. The commissioner said, you need to start from scratch. And by that point, he had spent 9 months and $250,000 on designs for these architectural boards. And that's not money you get back. It's not like the architect gives you a refund if your permit's denied, right? You paid that, that's yours. You're done, right? And they denied his permit. And again, what did Mr. Anderson do? He did not run to federal court. He appealed it to the state court system, which is the right way of doing it, I think, at least. What do I know? He argued that the building design requirements were vague. Now, the trial court rejected Anderson's claims, but the Court of Appeals actually reversed. And the court actually applied the void for vagueness doctrine. So specifically here, the regulations did not give any guidance of what they're looking for, right? Who knows what interesting means, what monotonous means, what harmonious means? These words do not have a settled meaning, right? At best, you have to rely on individual subjective determinations. Drive around, tell me what you feel, right? That's the very definition of arbitrary governance. If you have to literally drive around and look at your window to know what the law is, that's not law at all. Okay? So the court found that the statute was unconstitutional on its face and a violation of the void for vagueness doctrine. But again, in the city of Ladue case I mentioned a moment ago, that was okay. In the Washington case, it was not okay. Someone says, Josh, how do you reconcile these cases? I think the mistake was in Washington to use very precise words like different colors and bright and things like monotony, right? The more you say, the harder it becomes to define. So in a way, giving guidance kind of backfires. The other statute is much more open-ended, and that one survived the constitutional scrutiny, right? But again, how is someone to know which one was too arbitrary? So what can be done? Well, drawings, right? Actually give drawings of what you expect architecture can look like. Give colors, give like a color wheel, right? You know, those little swatches, right? What different colors are recommended in an area? List specific materials that might be useful for construction, right? What kind of brick, what kind of stucco, and so on, right? There are things that the government can give to you because they obviously have something in mind, and they just can't come out and tell the guy what they want. So they have these kind of very vague discussions. Now, maybe they had no idea what they wanted, but they put this guy through a lot of suffering, and eventually he won. And look at the gorgeous structure they built in this beautiful parking lot. Look at that. Look at that Benjamin Moore. That just says Gilman to me when I see it. And there's the animal hospital right behind the vet hospital. I don't know what this is. Sort of a house structure. Looks like an apartment almost. I don't know what that is. Okay, 145. Is it very ugly? You don't like it? It's interesting. Oh, this guy's funny. He's paying attention. All right. Good. Any questions in the case I know you read? Which is my fault. Again, I'm not cold calling you because it was my fault. I didn't realize the last time I read one name. I was like, wait a minute, I have a plan. Yeah, Sydney.
Are these things really kind of big, they all
Look the same?
yeah, they kind of look the same, like
Park City? Yeah,
like
or
everything
House.
looks the same.
Yes. Any place that's sort of tourism related or generally pretty wealthy, they have these architectural board committees that can ensure that every construction looks exactly the same.
And is that just for the purpose of them trying to?
Well, I mean, look, so if you ask them, so we want things to be harmonious, cohesive, but if you actually probe them a bit, they'll say to keep property values up. Because they're afraid, again, that if we have some building that looks different, someone might not want to buy their house next door. And that's basically what it boils down to. Okay, so any questions so far? All right, that's all I got. So enjoy your spring break. Yeah, welcome. Okay, I'll put the poll on, go home. I'll see you guys. Don't come to my office and talk, you can. But just give me some feedback. Sorry, today was not the best class because just I had to improvise. All right, see you later.